Taylor Swift is like kind of the final boss of being famous if you really think about it. She seems to enjoy being in the spotlight, and she's certainly been able to manipulate her time in the spotlight in certain ways over the years in order to portray whatever story it is that she wants to tell at any given moment. And this is, of course, aided and abetted by her incredible and prolific body of work. But I think the question that I've really been starting to ask myself is, how has Taylor's relationship to fame changed over the years? And with the advent of the Taylor's Versions project, do we know anything more now than we did before in the eras that, we're coming to be reacquainted with, that we hadn't really realized the first time, or that we hadn't been granted access to? Today's video is prompted by an investigation that I'm currently doing into Red, Taylor's Version. One thing that I've been looking at specifically is how the re-recorded versions of the albums have dramatically impacted the way that we, the fans, relate to Taylor Swift, and how we understand her in ways that maybe we hadn't before. We enter into new territory on this emotional journey with her to reclaim her life's work, and it has been an incredibly fascinating exercise for me as a Taylor Swift historian to revisit the canon and consider how and why it was shaped the way that it was. And in trying to accomplish that, I think it's more interesting to kind of look at the revisions that Taylor makes over time through her subtle edits, whether it's destroying Girl at Home or changing the lyrics to Better Than Revenge, and also to examine the most direct interjections into the historical narrative that she's ever given so far, which is the vault tracks. As we, the fans, engage with both versions of these records, I think that our evolving responses illustrate the evolution of how consumers interact with music and artists in the social age. The Taylor's Version project has taken a legacy acts value proposition, here are my old songs to my beloved fans, polished up with better equipment, and made it into a relevant, lucrative opportunity for an artist at her very peak. It would have been so easy for Taylor to just phone in the re-recordings and leave these vaults exactly where they were in the past, to only be collected or redistributed when she had retired, or at some far off moment in the future. But instead, these vault tracks create a massive value add for this entire project that makes it worth examining beyond just the nostalgic indulgence of a retrospective. The very image of a locked vault full of mysterious, unheard of missives deepens the intimacy of the confessional secrecy she's cultivated with fans over the years. It's a glimpse into her sketchbook. There are half-formed ideas, 2 honest ballads, sappy love songs, middling pop bangers, and the occasional absolute stunner. What's most compelling to consider here is why certain songs were left off in favor of others to begin with. For example, was Nothing New, a vault track repolished with Phoebe Bridgers, simply too grown up and macabre for Red in 2012? A diluted version of this song, titled The Lucky One, exists on the standard track list. It dances around the same fears and feelings, but is couched in a more vague address to one of her key influences on this record, Joni Mitchell. During the promotional blitz of Red, her first foray into proper pop and the first album rollout with aims of world domination and more promotional partners than ever before, Taylor seemed in total control of the narrative. The vault tracks that we got on Red, Taylor's Version, and the few nuggets of insight that she's given in public appearances while promoting this re-recorded version tells a completely different story than the one we knew from then. If she seemed outwardly optimistic about her future in the music industry in 2012, well, that was a ruse. Behind the scenes, she was frightened. On her 4th record, she was no longer the scrappy up-and-comer. To grow up was to give up her prodigiousness. At the ripe age of 22, she felt in her lowest moments that she'd already done everything that she could ever do, and there was nothing left ahead of her. Are we only biding time until I lose your attention? And someone else lights up the room. People love an ingenue. She croons in a drunken stupor on Nothing New, a revealing deep cut left off the original record, excavated for Red, Taylor's Version. There is a tension throughout Swift's work that has always animated her detractors and fascinated critics. Art versus commerce. How much of this confessional diaristic storytelling is her truth, and to what extent is her truth abstracted to sell records? At so many junctures throughout her career, Taylor has constantly been presented with the specifically female charge of being fake. She's never presented herself as an artist that makes creative concessions in order to sell records. However, she has made some compromises. Her anxiety about her own legacy on Nothing New was important enough of a theme to include on Red, but it was still too early in her carefully stage-managed public growing up to say, I've had too much to drink tonight, in black and white on the record. So is it fake to obscure your total truth when you claim to divulge your darkest secrets only in song? Taylor's performance of authenticity occasionally rings hollow because it is indeed a performance of strategic vulnerability. As one of the first social media pop stars, Taylor instantly understood the power of delivering your own message, bypassing opportunities for your message to be misconstrued or rewritten via traditional media. With the Taylor's Version project, Taylor grips her narrative even further, all with the empowered mission of reclaiming what is rightfully hers. The vault tracks in particular have illuminated to me a very interesting theme that I have always noticed traversing her entire discography in some shape or form, her reckoning with becoming the world's main character. In the early years of Taylor's career, relatability was massively important to the strength of her parasocial relationships. You kind of had to see yourself in her lyrics and feel the feelings that she was feeling on the page in order to get invested in her work. She is not the world's greatest singer, dancer, or instrumentalist. She is, however, a masterful and prolific storyteller and communicator. Witnessing the revisions of Taylor's version is, to the trained eye, a revealing glimpse behind the curtains. We get to see how the sausage was made. There was a fourth wall right up until around 1989 that couldn't be broken. She brushed up against it then, but dismantled it entirely and looked straight into the lens at us on what is probably her least relatable and most alienating and polarizing record, Reputation. Before the outside noise got so loud that she couldn't simply tune it out or pretend that it wasn't there, Taylor operated kind of like a reality star when she was writing her records. Reality stars have to live their lives authentically on camera, knowing full well they're being filmed, but they have to act like they don't know that the camera is there. It's this push and pull of voyeurism and exhibitionism between the audience and our star. The more she reveals, the more captivated we are, the more we want to see what's behind the camera, what's in the frame that we're not seeing. It's quite a constraining thing for her to write about her most intimate emotional experiences, namely falling in and out of love, without addressing the elephant in the room, which is her celebrity. And of course, it slips in here and there as her star becomes more and more powerful over the years, but this only becomes more clear with Taylor's version. So today, in this video, I want to chart the progression of her relationship to fame in the public eye throughout her discography, paying close attention to chronology and the lyrics because, of course, they are our primary sources of information. If you're new here, my name is Zach. I'm the Swiftologist. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. I make thoughtful weekly videos about pop culture, and there's going to be a lot of stuff going on about one Miss Taylor Swift because she is releasing a new album soon. So I'm thinking, if you're interested in these thoughtful analytical discussions about Taylor Swift's life and times, you might want to check out my podcast, Evolution of a Snake, where we go through in excruciating detail each and every year of her career. And we're going to be having a live show in London soon. So go to evolutionofasnake.com and give us your email so that we can tell you all about the details as and when they come out. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Over 50% of you that watch aren't subscribed, and that's offensive. So rectify that, please. Before we get into the rest of today's video, I want to say a huge thank you to a returning sponsor of Swiftologist, Scentbird. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service that lets you choose a new designer fragrance to try every single month for just $17. Scentbird offers affordable and flexible subscription plans that you can also skip or cancel at any time, which makes it a completely hassle-free experience. Every month you get to pick what you want to receive, so there is very little chance that you will receive something that you truly hate. They have over 700 perfumes and colognes and a lot of unisex options. They carry Issey Miyake, Gucci, Prada, Tom Ford, and a bunch of indie labels too, which is super exciting, like Skylar and Heretic. Best of all is that you get a 30-day supply in each fragrance, so you can test all of the options that are available to you before committing to a full-size bottle that can cost upwards of $150 and sometimes even between $300 and $500 as well. I want to tell you about 3 fragrances that are available on Scentbird that I really love and do consider to be my signature scents. First up is Eccentric 01 by Eccentric Molecules. This really reminds me of one of my all-time favorites, Glossier U. It's really hard to find samples of that, so I think getting something like Eccentric 01 is probably a good idea if you're looking to try it but you don't want to make the jump yet. I really consider this to be kind of like a base layer fragrance, or something that is just super inoffensive. Like if you were a nurse or you worked in a school or something like that and you wanted to have a little spice on you but you didn't want to alienate the people around you, this is a really good idea. It kind of just blends into your skin. It has pink pepper, lime, jasmine, and musk, and it also contains the ever important ISO E Super, which is that very unique and mysterious ingredient that smells different on every single person that it sprays upon. So I would recommend this if you're interested in Glossier U, or if you're looking for a more low profile skin scent. Another one of my favorites that is a staple on Scentbird is L'Eau de Issey by Issey Miyake. This is the 90s perfume. My mom used to wear it in the 90s, and I know that sounds kind of like, ew, I don't want something your mom would wear, but my mom was a cool girl. My mom was like a cast member of Sex and the City in the 90s. This is such a gorgeous fragrance. A little goes a long way. It is very strong, and it's got 7 different florals, sandalwood, cedar, and a very bright musk. It's got this vibe of like a cocktail bar in Manhattan in the 90s, and also, I think maybe an unpopular opinion, I think that L'Eau de Issey is super unisex. Then we come to my signature scent, and I don't want to share this because I feel like it's already too popular and it's super unique. It's one of those fragrances that like will wear the hell out of you if you're not wearing it. You have to be a certain kind of person to wear this fragrance. It is Black Orchid by Tom Ford. This is a very polarizing scent. You either love it or you despise it, kind of like me and my content in the Swiftie community. It's punctuated by these deep spices, which can be very off-putting to some people, from the patchouli and the orchid and then the bergamot as well. This is a showstopper. Use my coupon code SWIFT for 55% off at Scentbird. It's just a little over $7 for your first month, and it's available in the US and Canada. So what are you waiting for? Thank you again so much to Scentbird for sponsoring this video. Let's start with the first 3 records, where the curtain was fully up and the fourth wall of Taylor being a famous person writing about being famous hadn't quite broken yet. Fame was not much of a player in the early days of the discography, particularly between Debut and Speak Now. Because Debut was a moderate success and a bit of a sleeper hit, Taylor got to experience fame with the added advantage of maintaining some form of normalcy. Yes, she was going to be on the Ellen DeGeneres show, but she could probably go to the mall and not get completely mobbed afterwards as well. It's important to remember that Taylor was not an overnight success. It took about 2 years after her first record came out before she really entered the public consciousness and the mainstream beyond teenage girls and their parents. The 2 songs that I can think of from this time that do kind of address her growing star power are Change and Long Live, which are really songs that are more about her success within the industry. It's insider baseball, if you will, for her record label and her bandmates, celebrating what they've accomplished as, you know, the little guy. They don't really meditate on her relationship to stardom, however. If we're being really nitpicky about trying to locate the exact moment where the Taylor Swift we meet in song becomes sentient of her position as a famous person, then we simply must visit We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together. The lyric here that acknowledges the unusualness of her life as a successful performing artist is, and you would hide away and find your peace of mind with some indie record that's much cooler than mine. This is a barb that is expounded upon on the vault track I Bet You Think About Me. That song is a takedown of a pretentious movie star. In fact, it's so deliberate and direct. I tried to fit in your upper crust circles. You grew up in a Silver Spoon gated community. I was raised on a farm. It wasn't a mansion, just living room dancing and kitchen table bills. First of all, this is hysterical because that is a classic Swiftian selective representation of her life to fit the narrative that she's trying to construct. So here, what she wants to do is put down her ex-lover for being a pretentious snob who has no notion of what it means to live a real life. So she exaggerates her upper middle class upbringing, kind of trying to make it seem a little bit more working class than it was, while comparing it to his Silver Spoon life to create a dramatic contrast that makes her appear more authentic. I mean, this was just kind of funny. She might not have grown up in a mansion, but that Christmas tree farm was a country estate, Miss Girl, and your parents were stockbrokers. You weren't at the creek gathering tadpoles and milking the goats, that's for sure. I think this song is pretty revealing of 2 essential components of her positionality as a star in this particular juncture of her career: her insecurity and her self-awareness. This song was never going to make it onto the standard edition of Red. First of all, it invites the listener to more closely scrutinize her own background, which doesn't really fit with the narrative she was still trying to peddle in 2012. Small town girl dreams big, accidentally becomes successful. She talks about regretting and downplaying her business involvement in her career later on, but I digress. But this kind of direct takedown of another famous person kind of instantly alienates her from her audience. Most of the jabs traded here aren't general enough to be relatable. They are specific, pointed, Hollywood class warfare that doesn't really make a lot of sense to anyone who isn't in the biz. The tension in that relationship was a tension that lived in Taylor and spilled out elsewhere on Red as well. She was feeling insecure about her legacy and her future prospects as an artist. What she's revealed in I Bet You Think About Me is that she acknowledges there are certain circles in Hollywood that you have to inherit or be born into. Simply having a lot of money or some temporary success is not enough to become a superstar. You need social and cultural cachet, and this was something that she sorely lacked at the time. Though Speak Now was an incredible artistic feat and has definitely been acclaimed in hindsight, it was mostly written off by the industry at the time as more of the same from our latest country pop star. That it had no major radio singles or global hits kind of further reinforced that. The reviews were semi-dismissive, and this is part of why she wanted to work with Max Martin in the first place. I think when she approached Red, she decided that she needed the kind of global reach that only a #1 pop hit could provide, a success that was so big it would demand respect from her peers to prove that she couldn't be ignored or pigeonholed. So respect and acclaim was something that was definitely on her mind, and part of the reason why Red is sonically all over the place is because it mirrors this kind of confused and fractured inner emotional landscape that she was contending with at the time. I'm 22 and I'm all over the place, so my album is all over the place, she said in an interview from this period. She already knew, as it had been well reinforced to her, that she wouldn't simply be able to just live her life and write about it as she went along. She would need to do something more. Let's return to Nothing New to explore this thread. They tell you while you're young, girl, girls, go out and have your fun, and then they hunt and slay the ones who actually do it. Criticize the way you fly when you're soaring through the sky, shoots you down, and then they sigh and say, she looks like she's been through it. The they that she's speaking to specifically is the media and or the public, but mostly the media. We know she had been greatly cautioned against doing anything polarizing, political or personal, by her team, and she had, at this point, been subjected to juvenile speculation about her love life on television, at award shows, and in radio interviews. There was also the magnification of the infamous Kanye incident, and it was this kind of contentification, dramaification, if you will, of her personal life that kind of threatened to overshadow her actual work. And one of the main things that Kanye said, which I truly believe has haunted her because she respected him greatly as an artist, was that he kind of doubled down on what he did. Even after he said he was sorry for interrupting her and taking the award from her hands, he kept repeating his claim that Beyonce is the kind of artist who is a once-in-a-generation talent, while Taylor was just any other white American girl with a catchy song. How long will it be cute, she says, all this crying in my room when you can't blame it on my youth and roll your eyes with affection? Now, we obviously know that this wasn't true, that she was just a one-trick pony, but I think that this characterization really affected her psychologically in the long run, which led her to second-guess her own merits as an artist. Not that it ever stopped her from creating, thank God. We know that she's very motivated by constructive and even negative criticism, but I think it did make her stop, pause, and have a bit of an identity crisis. Because Taylor is a classic overthinker and tends to ruminate on negative thoughts, especially in song, she has this middle-of-the-night anxious outburst that expresses a deep fear of being replaced at 22 years old. I know someday I'm going to meet her. It's a fever dream, the kind of radiance you only have at 17. She'll know the way, and then she'll say she's got a map from me. I'll say I'm happy for her, and then I'll cry myself to sleep. These fears that she's talking about on Nothing New are pretty much all show business related, and they're very morbid too. It's kind of a bit unusual for a 22-year-old to be abstracting that far into the future. To her target demographic at the time, this would have been a difficult sell, and it would have been hard to understand her anxiety, particularly around becoming irrelevant, because she was very relevant at this period of time. I think there may even have been a superstitious element to leaving this off the record as well. If I say it on the record that there's someone waiting in the wings to replace me and I'm not all that, will they agree and think that it's true? It's better to change the subject or just dance around it instead, or so I think her thinking went. And that's what she did on The Lucky One, exploring the same tensions in Nothing New, but through the guise of a folklorian-style daydream. On The Lucky One, she's speaking in second person for the entire song, but she briefly glances up at the lens from the corner of her eye towards the end of this number. Now my name is up in lights, but I think you got it right. This song has always frustrated me because there is no clear resolution. Got what right? Took her money and the dignity and got the hell out? That has never been an appealing proposition to Taylor Swift, who cares way too much about being famous and seeking approval from others. It didn't ring true to me, and I think it's because she was holding something back. When Red Taylor's version came out, I had an aha moment, and Nothing New kind of clicked with me and helped me understand why The Lucky One is the way that it is. And for that, I am so grateful. Much to think about. This is a true Easter egg, and you all need to just jot that down. Let's move on to when she was kind of showing a leg out from under the curtain of the fourth wall. 1989 was a very intentional rebrand, as we know. I've spoken about it a million times. Her official genre abandonment and full-time switch to being a pop girl. Part of accomplishing this was clapping back at the naysayers. And one way that Taylor has interacted with her position as a public figure in her music is to address or dispel narratives about her that she believes to be untrue or unfair. The period between Red and 1989 was fraught with a lot of slut-shaming. After dating Harry Styles, she truly became the national punching bag for misogynistic diatribes about crazy girls who feel too much. Her bright, sunny, and earnest depiction of herself as a lover of love had accidentally cultivated an era of desperation. This was obviously untrue, but giving an interview about how hurt this characterization made her feel would definitely not solve this problem. What she learned from Red, again, was the power of a pop hit, how it can transmit a message all across the world, and there is no opportunity, it's simply too short, for anyone to intervene. If that song is particularly catchy, it reinforces to the listener whatever it is that you're trying to tell them. Think about it. It's like reverse psychology. Taylor Swift goes on too many dates. Taylor Swift is boy crazy and needy. Well, I'm just going to shake it off. And Shake It Off is yet another reclamation of her narrative, the writing of a ship. It's kind of insane how many times she's been able to derail stereotypes or negative tropes about her by simply releasing music and rewriting the story. It speaks to her specific combination of skill, melodic pop songwriting, and stellar delivery from a convincing communicator. I'm dancing on my own. I make the moves up as I go. And that is what they don't know. She's basically saying, I don't give a you know what about what you say about me because I am in control. middle of my destiny, and I am one step ahead of you. Never was this more clear than on the ultimate satire and clapback, the brilliant Blank Space. We don't need to linger here for too long because I have discussed this at length, but this was yet another example of her subtly dismantling a story that was being told about her that she didn't like. By pointing out the absurdity and heightening it for dramatic effect, the narrative lost its power, for a while at least. Neither of these songs were particularly relatable, but the one thing that can make up for a lack of relatability is the perfect verse, chorus, hook structure. Something that Taylor doesn't get enough credit for is her ability to work in the kind of melodic math way that she, I think, picked up from Max Martin, but also just kind of instinctively knows how to do. She was able to portray herself as unbothered on 1989, liberated even by the media's ludicrous depictions of her, mighty and above it all, because it was just so factually incorrect. Another thread of fame anxiety that is woven throughout her work, and I would say is the most discreet way she grapples with her public persona while still remaining relatable, is secrecy. Because of the highly publicized nature of her relationships, it only makes sense that in order to protect them or really give them a shot at having a future, they must be kept private until they are stable. This was a losing formula, especially in the beginning of her career. They kind of never made it to the point of being stable, especially by the time the central romance on 1989 rolled around, her relationship with Harry Styles, and that was public. They did go to some length to try and minimize the damage that being public could have on their bond, but ultimately that failed. But we can see now how fame factored into their dissolution on songs like I Know Places. It's a scene and we're out here in plain sight. I can hear them whisper as we pass by. It's a bad sign. And further, something happens when everybody finds out. Love's a fragile little flame. It can burn out. They are the hunters, we are the foxes, and we run. This song is kind of a hopeful reassurance to her love that they can survive this chaos. She can outsmart the insatiable desire of the public and the media to know the intimate details of her relationships. What this song always prompts in me, and I think is very interesting, is that there is a certain level of knowingness here. And it's interesting to think of her guarding the privacy of her relationships as something of a trade secret as well. The exclusive on where and how her romantic relationships go wrong is for Taylor Swift's eyes and pen only. Talking in interviews about her romantic conquests or being seen in too many places in public with them before she had the chance to write songs about it would be giving up proprietary information. Her bread and butter has always been confessional songwriting. If you take away the confessional aspect of it, she may lose control of the narrative, and we don't want that to happen. Ultimately, by referring to the media that hounds her vaguely as vultures or likening her and her lover to foxes escaping hunters, she's leaving enough room for her listeners to apply the message of this song to their own life. Ultimately, secrecy, having to hide your relationship from others in fear of judgment, is a universal experience beyond just being a celebrity. You can see why a song like I Know Places would make it to the official narrative, and a song like I Bet You Think About Me wouldn't. There is a certain generality that makes I Know Places work. This is also why there are so many gay readings and interpretations or misinterpretations of her songs. Hiding, being afraid of your love, being afraid to be found out, or being afraid of your love being judged are fears that her LGBT listeners grapple with in a very real and all-consuming way. And when the lyrics are left somewhat up to interpretation, you begin to fill in the blanks with your own experiences. And that's okay, until you try to insist that your experience is her experience, or even more crazily, that her experience is the whole queer experience. But anyway, Taylor's meditations on fame are somewhat more pronounced in the vault tracks included on 1989, which are certainly more searching and unsure than the bulletproof, neat and tidy stories on the stolen version of 1989. If Blank Space is a middle finger to the camera, then Slut is her throwing her hands up in a mea culpa. Here our narrator is exhausted by the never-ending contradiction of being a very beautiful and famous musician who people love to make discourse about. The intersection of secrecy, knowingness, and the fame anxiety forms a perfect shape here. Love Lorne and nobody knows. I'll pay the price. You won't. Unlike Blank Space, she's not rejecting scrutiny with a clever twist. Here, our ever-empowered narrator is very briefly tired of protesting too much. If I'm all dressed up, they might as well be looking at us. And if they call me a slut, it might be worth it for once. Here she's suggesting that despite the risk, our classically risk-averse narrator, whose every decision is thought through meticulously, has decided to throw caution to the wind. And she realizes that no matter what she does in this moment, she can't win. And her lust is stronger than her fear. Before the relationship has even reached its natural conclusion, like an oracle, she knows exactly how this is going to play out, because keeping track of how she is perceived is very important to staying on top of her narrative. Everybody wants him, that was my crime. Wrong place at the right time, she writes. That lusty element of 1989 was waxed off of the original record, creating a more removed and distant package of bulletproof pop. With the narrative so straightforward and the conclusion already foregone in the liner notes, she lost him, but she found herself, and somehow that was everything, Fame becomes a character almost on Is It Over Now? Or maybe even a sidekick to both our hero and our heroine's foibles. Did you think I didn't see you? There were flashing lights. At least I had the decency to keep my nights out of sight, only rumors about my hips and thighs and my whispered sighs. Here, Fame functions as almost a handicap for Taylor. She must have the decency to keep her dalliances out of the public eye, or else she'll be called a slut, or she might even stand to hurt her ex's feelings, which is something that she, as a good person, does not want to do. She invokes her paramour's carelessness here for two purposes: to point out that Fame treats women differently. No one was calling Harry a slut for being papped outside the hotels of 7 different random women, and also to show how there is an element of choice to interacting with Fame. There is a right way and a wrong way to be famous. You can hurt people or support them with the decisions that you make while you are engaging with your celebrity. And then, of course, we get into our full mask off moment. This is the moment where any delusion of Taylor being just like you went completely out the window. Instead of studiously avoiding referencing the unusualness of her life or editing those references out, she leans in here and plays a character. What's very interesting about Reputation is how she managed to play 2 games at once. I'm playing a character, or am I? I'm dead serious. The old Taylor is dead, but really, in conversations with fans, she's describing the album as 20% vindictive and 80% a hidden love story. She was able to overcome the alienation of the subject matter by burying the real story behind the foreground of revenge and reinvention. It wasn't really that much of a departure sonically, the record itself, but the subject matter certainly addressed the elephant in the room. She could very well have cut those jarring, polarizing, direct-to-camera addresses off from this record and just put out that love story and continued to behave like nothing had happened. An older version of Taylor would have certainly done that, but she was committed to vindicating herself, to getting one over on those who thought they could beat her at her own game. You can't play spin doctor with Taylor Swift. The world moves on, another day, another drama, but not for her. All she thinks about is karma. The you that Taylor addresses in Look What You Made Me Do and the them that she's addressing in I Did Something Bad are functionally the same thing, the public. But this time, she's not taking just aim at the media. For once, this conversation that she didn't like about her persona was organically generated by the masses, the people. It was interesting watching her address her antagonistic public while also playing up the parasocial relationship with her fans. How did we not manage to feel alienated by her biting back? Well, some people did. Because we were invested in her story, though, by addressing the nonsense instead of ignoring it, she managed to finally drop that charge of being fake and being calculated, which was the most pervasive myth about her at that time. Here was everything, all laid out for you. Of course, this was not entirely organic. Nothing ever is when a celebrity is communicating with millions of people. But I think as a stunt, it did exactly what it needed to do, which was return control about the Taylor Swift narrative and Taylor Swift's motives to Taylor Swift. I think this attitude is less successful in the more obviously victim narrative-driven parts of this record. They're burning all the witches, even if you aren't one, is a little bit melodramatic, even for my taste. And she's not really taking any accountability for what happened on Reputation. We most honestly get her feelings, again, through True Secrecy or her romance, whether it's that taut and tense silence between her and her secret lover in a crowded room, or the image of her and her beloved dancing in a burning room with their hands tied. Call It What You Want revisits that indignant resignation that we heard on Slut, only this time she's got a bit more bite in her. I find the attitude that's being put on here kind of hard to believe, even though I do love this song, because she's come out and said publicly many times just how damaging this period of her life was psychologically to her. It doesn't necessarily read as authentic. Usually when someone says they don't care, they really, really do care. And that was the message of, call it what you want. All the liars are calling me one. Nobody's heard from me for months. I'm doing better than I ever was. They took the crown, but it's all right. It's not all right, but we'll move on eventually and you'll get an even bigger crown. She is literally finding love in a hopeless place on Reputation and doing that very Swiftian thing that we see her do throughout all of her writing about love and romance, finding salvation in the joy that she shares with someone else. We hear about her anxiety about being prejudged based on this colossal sphere of information that is now accessible about her to the whole world from all kinds of sources on Delicate. My reputation's never been worse, so you must like me for me. There is something very woozy, sexy, and atmospheric about Reputation, and I think it's because she's fighting back. What's interesting is that this album, even though it's kind of the most gossip heavy or tied in tea moment, it's very rarely confessional. It's thought-provoking and occasionally a bit scandalous, but she has never been less vulnerable than she is on Reputation. The impact of her awareness of fame and her breaking of the fourth wall has rendered her somewhat unknowable here. It's put a bit of distance between her and the listener. She's not quite ready to be reflective about what she's been through, but she is fully prepared to strike back. This was very contradictory to the version of Taylor Swift the public was familiar with, the gee whiz, all shucks, America's sweetheart. People, frankly, were not very pleased to see Taylor being a little bit more aggressive. It was kind of groundbreaking. I loved it. Post Reputation, we have Lover, of course, and I think there are two songs here to mind about her thoughts on being famous that are quite interesting. The Archer implies that there was a lot more damage done to her psyche than she would have let on in her past record. She wanders into that vulnerable space that she very much intentionally avoided on Reputation. Combat, I'm ready for combat. I say I don't want that, but what if I do? I cut off my nose just to spite my face, and I hate my reflection for years and years. This kind of second guesses her anti-hero narrative that she had been peddling, that idea of everyone has misunderstood me and now I must clear my name by playing into all of their tropes. She's admitting here that perhaps, despite all her protestations of innocence, she may have some culpability in her increasingly fraught relationships with those around her and the public. This was also hot on the heels of her most public betrayal, the sale of her master recordings, which coincided with her fear of truly aging out of being a pop star, that tension that we heard on Nothing New, which she almost preempted reemerging 7 years later. She talks about this a lot in Miss Americana, and I think she really did think that Lover was her last bit at being a pop girl. What's interesting about The Archer is that the more I listen to it, the more I think that she's speaking directly to the fans. I've got 100 thrown out pieces I almost said to you, which reminds me of that interview that she gave where she said that in the middle of when she was feeling so misunderstood in the Reputation era, she kept writing these essays over and over, these think pieces, kind of defending herself and going point by point against all these allegations made against her that she just ended up throwing away because she knew she wasn't able to control the tenor of the conversation. Help me hold on to you, she says, and this is a very direct, sincere, and strategically vulnerable plea to her fans. Let me bring you close again after pushing you away for a while. They see right through me. I see right through me. Who could ever leave me, darling? Who could stay? You could stay. Literally us, her loyal army and legion of fans who wage wars on her behalf and ensure that justice is done. This song is a very soft version of Tay Voodoo, a re-galvanizing of the troops. We also have The Man on Lover to discuss, but that's not really about her relationship to fame. It's more about being a woman in the music industry. I don't see this as being anything new in the entry of songs about her relationship with the public eye, but it definitely kind of does fall in line with that bridge of I did something bad, just slightly melodramatic. Folklore actually has some very interesting meditations on her public performance. She was very liberated by this style of free-flowing, narrative-driven, autofiction-esque lyricism in so many ways, but I think it also allowed her to examine the mechanisms behind her undying thirst for validation and approval as a performer. We see this most beautifully articulated on Mirrorball. Again, you get this very direct intimacy that's fostered from the very first line. I want you to know that I'm a Mirrorball. I'm dropping the act. I'm letting you in. I'm telling you why it has to be about me all the time or else I will die. The metaphor of a Mirrorball is so brilliant for what she's trying to convey here. This old ancient object that is kind of irrelevant but, sits in the middle of the room that you just can't ignore because it's in the middle of the room and it's reflecting light all around, but you never really think about a mirror ball existing in the daytime. It's still there. It's still reflecting the light. It's still making these beautiful shapes and patterns, but there's no one there to admire it. This idea of changing as well, I can change everything about me to fit in, really speaks to the pressure that she's spoken of before for female artists to constantly need to reiterate and become a new version of themselves that's in keeping with what's popular at the time. This is the very idea of having eras of your life that are distinct enough to separate them into definitive sections of a show with corresponding outfits and set pieces. You never really think how that might contribute to a shaky sense of self, especially from someone whose self-knowledge seems to be so intricate and thorough. But the most beautiful part of Mirrorball is this lyric: I'm still a believer, but I don't know why. She's been burned by her pursuit of fame and the perils of being famous so many times that it's practically nonsensical for her to want to keep doing this, to keep getting more famous. It's like an addiction almost. I've never been a natural. All I do is try. Taylor had to work really hard to be a pop star. Again, her gifts lie in the storytelling, but that is a backstage gift. She really had to work very hard and endure a lot of pretty strong criticism about her performance abilities from the get-go. Her vocal ability, stage presence, and dance skills are still discussed as being subpar to this day. We know that she is a student by nature. She takes vocal lessons, she works twice as long on the choreo because she knows it's difficult for her to grasp. And so the result that we get from this song is a picture of a person who is obsessively repeating a cycle of something that is, one, not easy to accomplish, and two, potentially not good for her over and over and over again. And in search of what? Why is she doing this? Well, Because she's a mirror ball. She needs you to look at her. And whether you do or not, she will keep shining. If Mirrorball is more abstract, kind of this macro commentary on the psychological impulses behind her hunger for fame, then Peace is a very upsetting reckoning with the reality of what this kind of pursuit does to a person and to the people around them. She can't promise the turkey that she loves the most in the world that she can ever give him peace. The rain is always going to come when you're standing with me, she says with almost a withdrawn sigh. She wonders if that can ever be enough. Then on Evermore, we have Long Story Short, which is kind of more of the same. We've definitely heard this before, but it's basically a reassurance to her enemies that Tay Voodoo is very, very real and it's on the way. Your enemies will defeat themselves before they get the chance to swing. Well, say that. Say that. We also conclude this more wandering and expansive era of creativity with Evermore, which is a very fitting resolution. I think she really put the 2016 cancellation and brush with no longer being famous to bed here. This is a very plain and beautiful ballad. Motion capture put me in a bad light. I'm writing letters addressed to the fire. This idea that the pain of that experience was bad enough to stick around for the rest of her life was a very real fear to her. And I think that the bridge is very applicable for her relationship to her fans as well. When I was shipwrecked, I thought of you. In the cracks of light, I dreamed of you to get me through. It's like she knew there was a loyal and continuous relationship with her fans that she could always rely on, even if the outside world wasn't so hostile. I think this song was very purposefully included to let the fans know that she's okay now. This pain wouldn't be forevermore, she concludes. Midnights is again all over the place thematically. I think it's kind of a cheap shot to go to Antihero as an example of her relationship to fame, because this feels like a very stage-managed attempt at being self-aware. I'll stare directly at the sun but never in the mirror. It's kind of how I would describe this whole song's general vibe. Did you hear my covert narcissism I disguised as altruism? I heard it, but you didn't explain anything about it, and we don't interrogate that train of thought. We just say it. It's self-conscious, but it's not self-aware. We definitely get more ruminations on her legacy towards the end of the song, being convinced that her relatives will squander her life's work or taint her name. That's actually kind of interesting, how she thinks about trying to control the narrative, even posthumously. Midnight Rain is a very honest and confessional truth. I wanted that fame. She is interested in being with someone who does not yearn for a simple and small life, she realizes. Holidays, peppermint candy, but for him, it was every day. And do you hear the kind of horror and boredom in her voice when she makes that statement? Why should she even bother chasing after that? She could never have it even if she wanted to. Even when she's imagining the future of her ex, thinking about this relationship in hindsight, she automatically places herself as being on a television screen. He never thinks of me except for when I'm on TV. Being famous is so integral and so part of who she has been for so long that she kind of doesn't have a personhood without thinking of this abstracted edition of herself. She has to contend with these two very different versions of Taylor Swift in her own brain. It must be kind of disorienting. And we conclude this train of thought with Dear Reader, which is an incredibly interesting nugget. And to conclude the analysis with this is kind of mental illness. It definitely masquerades itself as giving advice or giving a lesson learned. I remember hearing it for the first time and being like, wow, this is like her just sharing what she's learned from recovering from the over party. But then it went to burn all the files, desert all your past lives. What was that? If you don't recognize yourself, that means you did it right. And I was like, where is this going? I thought you were with your London boy and the cruel summer was over, but I was wrong. The greatest of luxuries is your secrets, she says. When you aim at the devil, make sure you don't miss. There is something so mysterious to mine here. It is the never-ending Rubik's Cube. I could do a video just on this song alone. But most importantly is the refrain. Never take advice from someone who's falling apart. I remember hearing that and being like, okay, now who is the person that's falling apart? Because it can't be you. This is an extremely compelling moment between listener and artist, because Taylor's whole career and the very foundation of her parasocial relationship with her fans has been about, let me show you what I've learned, and hopefully you can learn from me too. But what if, for all these years and all these albums full of incredible music, these guiding lights that have shone through so many of our darkest nights, what if they were written by someone who has been slowly but surely falling apart? The girl with the keys to the kingdom, the map to understanding, the leader of salvation has lost her way. And what then? You wouldn't take my word for it if you knew who was talking, if you knew where I was walking. To a house, not a home, all alone, because nobody's there, where I pace in my pen and my friends found friends who care. No one sees when you lose because you're playing solitaire. This song is so major and groundbreaking, actually. Jover was literally staring us in the face. Let's start with, you wouldn't take my word for it if you knew who was talking. Excuse me? Who is talking? What are you trying to imply? What's most captivating about this is that she's deliberately not giving you the answer. It may be me who is falling apart. Maybe everything I told you all these years was nonsense and I've learned nothing and I'm the lowest I've ever been, despite writing song after song about how I'm okay forevermore and everything is good, and long story short, I survived. Maybe that was all a lie. And if you knew where I was walking, to a house, not a home, oof. Home is a feeling, not a place. And we have this perception of her, specifically at this moment in time, as existing in this domestic bliss, in a love bubble with her us against the world companion. And yet, here she is, telling us blankly, I am alone. I sit here and I drink and I think about all the bad things that have happened to me, and I'm so wrapped up in my own nonsense and neuroses that even my friends don't want to talk to me. And then she ends with, you should find another guiding light, but I shine so bright. This is like the inverse of Mirrorball. I can't. It's just pure excellence. So that is the evolution of Taylor Swift's relationship to fame. I can't believe we're leaving it on the atomic bomb of Dear Reader. I'm so pumped to hear Tortured Poets and see what she's cooking up on there. Personally, I think Who's Afraid of Little Old Me will be entered into this canon, but we'll just have to wait and see. What songs do you think could enter into this very fabled tradition of Taylor talking about the anxiety that she has about fame? And what do you think of this video? Are there any songs that you would add to this list that I missed out? Let me know, and I will see you soon. And I want to say another huge thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring this video. Goodbye, Swifties.